The quiet storm. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a swarm of mechanical bees, casting their cold glow across the packed conference room at Cross Tech. I stood in my usual spot close enough to the front to be useful, far enough back to remain invisible. That's where quiet daughters belong, in the spaces between noticed and forgotten. Quarterly results are in, my father Maurice announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never doubted his place in the room. Revenues up 18%, largely thanks to our Q3 digital transformation project. I felt my chest tighten. Our project, the one I'd spent 3 months architecting, debugging, and implementing while Callista handled the client relations, which mostly meant lunch meetings and photo ops. Callista, would you walk us through the client feedback? Maurice gestured toward my sister, who stood near the coffee station in her signature cream blazer, radiating the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having to prove yourself. She stepped forward with a practiced smile. Absolutely. The client satisfaction scores speak for themselves, 92% approval rating, with specific praise for our innovative approach to user experience. I watched her flip through slides I'd created, presenting metrics I'd calculated, describing solutions I'd coded. The room nodded appreciatively. Someone actually clapped. Any questions for our project lead? Maurice asked. Project lead. The words hit like a slap. I'd led that project from conception to completion. Callista had attended exactly 4 meetings and contributed one suggestion. Can we make the login screen prettier? A hand shot up from the back. The implementation timeline was incredibly tight. How did you manage the technical challenges? Callista's pause lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. Well, teamwork makes the dream work. I had great support from our operations team. She glanced in my direction, not at me, but near me, like I was a helpful piece of furniture. The meeting continued. I did not. Walking back to my office, I caught fragments of conversations. Callista really knocked it out of the park, and she's got such a strategic mind. Each word felt like another layer of erasure, another stroke of the brush painting me out of my own story. I closed my office door and sat at my desk, staring at the project timeline still open on my laptop. 6 months of 16-hour days. 6 months of solving problems Callista didn't even know existed. 6 months of building something I'd never get to call mine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Dinner Sunday. Don't forget to bring that data analysis Callista mentioned. I typed back. Which analysis? The one you did for her presentation. She said it was very helpful. Helpful, like I was her research assistant instead of the architect of the entire system. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. 30 years old today, and I was still the quiet daughter, still the useful shadow, still the one who did the work while someone else took the bow. Somewhere in the building, I could hear Callista's laugh echoing down the hallway, bright and careless and certain of its place in the world. The revelation came not with fanfare, but with the mundane betrayal of technology. I was at my parents' house the following Sunday, helping my mother with her presentation for the charity board, when her laptop froze mid-sentence. Use mine? I offered, sliding my MacBook across the kitchen island. I'll fix this. Her laptop was a mess of browser tabs and unorganized files, exactly what I'd expected. I was in the middle of restarting when a Slack notification popped up from the family group chat, the one I'd been removed from months ago without explanation. I shouldn't have looked. I knew better, but the preview text made my blood stop. Odelin's situation needs handling soon. My hands moved without permission, clicking into the thread. Maurice yesterday, 3:47 p.m. Adelin's getting too comfortable in the finance meetings. She's asking questions about Callista's expense reports. Vivian yesterday, 3:52 p.m. I noticed that too. She's always been too observant for her own good. Callista yesterday, 4:15 p.m. Maybe it's time for her to pursue other opportunities. She's been here 8 years. Natural transition point. Maurice, yesterday, 4:18 p.m. Agreed. I'll talk to legal about the best approach. Need to be careful with family dynamics. Callista, yesterday, 4:20 p.m. She won't fight it. She never does. The emoji felt like a knife between my ribs. That little yellow smile, so casual, so certain of my weakness. I read the thread 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of calculation. They weren't just planning to fire me, they were choreographing it, timing it, managing it like any other business transaction. The expense report's comment made my stomach drop. I had been asking questions about those, particularly the $47,000 conference expense that looked suspiciously like a European vacation. How's it going, honey? My mother's voice drifted from the living room. Almost done. I called back, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. I screenshotted the conversation and closed the laptop. When my mother returned, I was calmly transferring her files to my computer, acting like my world hadn't just shifted on its axis. "You're so helpful," she said, patting my shoulder. "What would we do without you? You're about to find out," I thought, but smiled instead. "Just glad I can help." That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the screenshot. 8 years of 60-hour weeks, 8 years of covering for Callista's mistakes, cleaning up her oversights, making her look competent. And this was how it ended, not with any recognition of my contributions, but with a smiley face emoji and the assumption that I'd disappear quietly. But they'd forgotten something, something crucial. I walked to my bedroom closet and reached behind my winter coats, pulling out a small wooden box I hadn't opened in 5 years. Inside was a letter from Grandpa, written in his careful script. "For Odalyn, open on your 30th birthday, not before." I turned 30 yesterday. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Odalyn, if you're reading this, it means you're 30, and it means you're ready. Not because of your age, but because by now they've shown you who they really are. And I've been watching this family for 73 years, and I've seen how they treat the women who make them look good. Your grandmother built the foundation of everything we own, but no one remembers her name. Your mother had brilliant ideas until she learned to keep them to herself. You're different. You have your grandmother's mind and your own spine. That's why I'm trusting you with this. Enclosed, you'll find documentation showing that I've left you 35% of Crosstech's voting shares, held in trust until your 30th birthday. It's not enough to control the company alone, but it's enough to make your voice matter. I've also included contact information for 3 shareholders who've expressed concerns about the current leadership: Dr. Elena Martinez, Sarah Chen, and the Phoenix Investment Fund. They represent another 35% combined. If you can convince them, you'll have the majority you need. But Odalyn, this isn't just about business, it's about dignity. It's about making sure no one else has to stand in the shadows while someone else takes credit for their light. The evidence you'll need is in the second folder. I've been documenting things for years: financial irregularities, expense violations, personnel decisions that violated company policy. I couldn't act on them directly without creating family warfare, but you can. Don't let them erase you, granddaughter. You were never invisible. You were just waiting for your moment to be seen. All my love and faith. Grandpa, I set the letter down with hands that weren't quite steady. 35%. Not the controlling interest I'd fantasized about, but a foundation, a starting point. The second folder was thick with photocopied documents, bank statements, and what looked like expense reports dating back 3 years. I spread them across my dining table, and a pattern emerged that made my chest tight with vindication and rage. Callista's marketing expenses included $23,000 at luxury spas, $18,000 at designer boutiques, and $31,000 for team building exercises that were actually wine country weekends with her boyfriend. The consulting fees paid to her LLC for strategic advisory services totaled $89,000 in the past year alone, money that had gone straight into her personal account. My grandfather had been building a case, document by document, receipt by receipt, waiting for the right moment, waiting for me. I picked up my phone and dialed the number written in his careful script. Baird, Holbrook and Associates. This is Odalyn Cross. I need to speak with Mr. Baird about my grandfather's trust. There was a brief pause. Miss Cross, we've been expecting your call. Mr. Baird's office smelled like leather and old money, the kind of place where important decisions were made behind closed doors. He was exactly what I'd expected, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and careful with his words. Your grandfather was a remarkable man, he said, sliding a folder across the mahogany desk. He spent 2 years setting this up, making sure every detail was legally ironclad. I opened the folder to find share certificates, trust documents, and legal opinions all bearing my name. It was real, surreal, but real. 35% gives you significant influence. Mr. Baird continued, but you'll need 51% for controlling interest. Your grandfather identified 3 potential allies. He handed me another folder, this one containing detailed profiles. Dr. Elena Martinez held 12% of the company. She'd been an angel investor in the early days, back when CrossTech was just my grandfather's idea and a rented garage. According to her file, she'd grown increasingly concerned about management accountability and financial transparency. Sarah Chin owned 8%. She'd been Chief Technology Officer until 2 years ago, when Callista had somehow convinced my father that Sarah's leadership style wasn't aligned with company culture. The real reason, according to the documents, was that Sarah had questioned Callista's technical competence during a board meeting. The Phoenix Investment Fund controlled 15%. They were the newest shareholders, having bought in during our Series C funding round. Their investment thesis had been built around strong family leadership and operational excellence. If they knew what was really happening, they might be interested in changes. What's my next step? I asked. Convince them. Mr. Baird said simply, but carefully. If your family gets wind of this before you're ready, they'll take countermeasures. I nodded, already forming a plan. How long do I have? The quarterly board meeting is in 3 weeks. That would be the ideal time to make your move. Yes, Kimezom. 3 weeks to gather allies, build a case, and find the courage to challenge everything I've been taught to accept. I left Mr. Baird's office with a briefcase full of documents and a phone full of new contacts. The first call was to Ellen Morris, my former HR director who'd been restructured out 6 months ago. If anyone had documentation of Callista's management issues, it would be Ellen. She answered on the second ring. Odalyn, this is a surprise. Ellen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you keep backups of the personnel files before you left? There was a long pause. Why are you asking? Because I think it's time someone told the truth about what's been happening at Cross Tech. Another pause. Then, can you meet me for coffee? The coffee shop Ellen chose was deliberately anonymous, a chain restaurant off the highway, the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the ambient noise of espresso machines and casual chatter. She looked tired, older than when I'd last seen her. Leaving Cross Tech hadn't been kind to her. I kept everything, she said without preamble, sliding a flash drive across the table. Call it insurance. Call it covering my ass, but I'm glad I did. I stared at the small device. What's on it? 3 years of incident reports, expense audits, and personnel complaints. All the things that mysteriously disappeared from the official files after I was let go. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Odalyn, there are 17 different HR violations on that drive. Sexual harassment complaints against Callista that were buried. Expense fraud that was reclassified as misunderstandings. Performance reviews that were altered after the fact. My stomach dropped. Sexual harassment, 3 separate incidents with junior male employees, inappropriate comments, unwanted advances, creating hostile work environments when they rejected her. I documented everything, recommended disciplinary action, and was told to handle it quietly. I thought about the young man from accounting who'd quit suddenly last year, and the intern who'd requested a transfer to a different department after just 2 weeks working with Callista. Why didn't you fight this? I asked. Ellen's laugh was bitter. Fight it with what I'm a 52-year-old woman in HR. My word against the golden daughter of the company founder. She shook her head. I have a mortgage and 2 kids in college. I couldn't afford to be a martyr. I understood. I'd made the same calculation 100 times the cost of speaking up versus the safety of staying quiet. But you can, Ellen continued, studying my face. You have standing, family connection. And now you have proof. The question is, are you going to use it? I pocketed the flash drive. I need 2 weeks. To do what? To make sure this time the right people are listening. That afternoon, I called Dr. Martinez. Her assistant was polite but protective. Dr. Martinez was in surgery and couldn't be disturbed. I left a message. Tell her it's about cross-tech governance issues. I believe we share some concerns. She called back within an hour. Ms. Cross, I've been hoping someone from your family would reach out. I have some serious questions about the company's direction. So do I. Could we meet to discuss them? How about dinner Thursday? There's a lot to talk about. Next was Sarah Chin. She was harder to reach, working as a consultant in Silicon Valley. But when I finally got her on the phone, her response was immediate. They pushed me out because I wouldn't rubber stamp Callista's incompetence. She said bluntly, I'd be very interested in hearing what you have to say. The Phoenix Fund was the biggest challenge. They operated through layers of partners and associates, people who spoke in corporate euphemisms and quarterly projections. But their investment thesis had been clear they'd bought into Crosstech because of its strong family leadership and sustainable growth model. If they learned that the leadership was corrupt and the growth was built on fraudulent reporting, they'd have a fiduciary duty to act. I spent the weekend putting together a presentation that would have made my grandfather proud. Clean data, clear narrative, irrefutable evidence. By Sunday night, I had a story that even Callista couldn't spin. Dr. Martinez chose a restaurant that felt like a secret dim lighting, private booths, the kind of place where venture capitalists made deals that changed industries. She was smaller than I'd expected, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Your grandfather was a visionary, she said, settling into the booth across from me. But lately, I've been wondering if his vision survived him. I opened my laptop and turned it toward her. What if I told you it didn't? For the next hour, I walked her through everything, the fabricated expense reports, the buried HR complaints, the systematic crediting of other people's work to Callista. Dr. Martinez listened without interruption, occasionally leaning forward to examine a document more closely. These financial discrepancies, she said finally, pointing to a spreadsheet, they represent almost $2 million over 3 years. Money that was supposed to go into R&D and customer acquisition. Instead, it funded European vacations and designer wardrobes. Dr. Martinez closed the laptop and leaned back. What are you proposing? A change in leadership. Someone who understands that a company's strength comes from its people, not its PR. And you think you're that someone? I think I'm someone who's been building this company from the ground up for 8 years, and who cares more about sustainable growth than quarterly photo ops. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Your grandfather saw this coming, didn't he? He left me the tools to fix it. All right, she said finally. You have my vote. Sarah Chin was easier. We met via video call, and her anger was immediate and infectious. I tried to warn the board 2 years ago, she said, her face pixelated but her frustration crystal clear. Callista's technical knowledge is superficial at best. She can talk a good game, but she can't build anything sustainable. I showed her the same evidence, and her response was swift. When do we vote? The Phoenix Fund required a different approach. I spent a week preparing a formal presentation for their investment committee, treating it like the pitch it essentially was. They weren't interested in family drama or personal grievances. They wanted to know how this change would impact their returns. The meeting was held in a sterile conference room downtown, 5 people in identical dark suits sitting across from me like a tribunal. I clicked through slides showing market position, competitive advantages, and growth opportunities that were being squandered by incompetent leadership. The current management team has prioritized appearance over substance, I concluded. This has led to decreased employee retention, reduced innovation, and financial irregularities that could expose the company to legal liability. The lead partner, a woman with steel gray hair and a poker face, asked the question I'd been expecting. What makes you think you can do better? I pulled up my final slide, a list of every major project I'd led, every problem I'd solved, every innovation I'd driven. Not the projects Callista had taken credit for, but the work that had actually been done by my hands and mind. Because I've been doing better, I said simply. I just haven't been getting credit for it. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then the lead partner smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from any of them. Ms. Cross, you have our support. The annual Cross-Tech Leadership Gala was held at the Ritz-Carlton downtown, a glittering affair that celebrated the company's achievements while carefully omitting the people who'd actually achieved them. I arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress that suggested confidence without demanding attention. The ballroom buzzed with the kind of conversations that happened when industry leaders gathered to congratulate themselves. I moved through the crowd quietly, exchanging pleasantries with clients and partners, playing the role of dutiful daughter one last time. Callista was in her element, resplendent in gold silk, holding court near the stage with a circle of admirers. She caught my eye across the room and offered a wave that managed to be both dismissive and performative, acknowledging my presence while simultaneously signaling my irrelevance. The speeches began promptly at 8. Maurice took the stage first, delivering remarks about family legacy and innovative leadership that felt like a rehearsed obituary for everything Grandpa had actually built. Then it was Callista's turn. This year has been transformative for Cross-Tech, she began, her voice carrying easily across the room. Our digital transformation initiative has revolutionized how we serve our clients. I listened to her describe my work in broad, meaningless terms, watching the audience nod appreciatively. She had my slides, with my data, presenting my solutions. But somehow, in her telling, she'd conceived and executed everything while I'd provided valuable support. The applause was enthusiastic. Someone shouted "Bravo" from the back of the room. I didn't clap. I sat at my assigned table number 12, far from the stage, and studied the faces around me. These were smart people, industry veterans who should have been able to recognize substance over style. but they saw what they expected to see: the charming daughter of a successful family, confidently describing achievements that must surely be hers. During the networking portion of the evening, I made my rounds, not to schmooze or self promote, but to plant seeds. Casual conversations about industry trends that happen to touch on issues of corporate governance, gentle questions about due diligence and oversight that might stay with people when they read the news next week. Dr. Martinez found me near the bar, raising her champagne glass in a subtle toast. "Ready for Monday?" she asked quietly. "More than ready," I replied. Sarah Chin had flown in for the gala, her first time back in the building since her departure. She looked around the ballroom with the expression of someone revisiting a crime scene. "It's surreal," she said, watching Callista pose for photos with the mayor. 2 years ago, she couldn't explain the difference between front-end and back-end development. Now she's being honored for digital innovation. "That changes Monday," I said. "It better," Sarah replied. "Because if it doesn't, this company is headed for a cliff." I left the gala early, while Callista was still holding court and my parents were still basking in reflected glory. Tomorrow was Sunday. Monday was Judgment Day. As I waited for the valet to bring my car, I looked back at the hotel. Through the tall windows, I could see the party continuing: the laughter, the clinking glasses, the easy confidence of people who believed their success was permanent. They had no idea that the quiet daughter had found her voice. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in Denver. I dressed carefully, a navy suit that suggested authority without aggression, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a style that wouldn't distract from what I had to say. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. I'd called it using my newly activated shareholder rights, citing urgent governance issues requiring immediate attention. The official notice had been served Friday afternoon, giving everyone exactly the 72 hours required by company bylaws. I arrived at Crosstech early, parking in the executive garage with a badge that still worked for now. The building felt different somehow, charged with the electricity of approaching change. Or maybe that was just my imagination. The boardroom was already half full when I entered at 9:45. Dr. Martinez sat near the head of the table, reviewing documents. Sarah Chin had dialed in from California, her face sharp and alert on the conference room screen. The Phoenix Fund was represented by two partners I recognized from our recent meeting. My father stood near the windows, his face a mask of controlled fury. Callista sat beside him, perfectly composed in cream cashmere, but I caught the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her notepad. "Odalyn," Maurice said as I took my seat, "I have to say this is highly irregular. Calling an emergency meeting without discussing, I'm calling this meeting as a shareholder," I interrupted, my voice steady, "not as your daughter." The distinction landed like a stone in still water, ripples of understanding spreading across the room. Mr. Baird entered at precisely 10 o'clock, carrying a briefcase that contained the legal foundation for everything that was about to happen. He nodded to me once, a signal that we were ready. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, standing to address the room, "thank you for coming on short notice. I've called this meeting to address serious concerns about the leadership and financial management of Crosstech." I clicked to my first slide, a formal agenda that outlined what was about to unfold. First, I'll be presenting evidence of financial irregularities, HR violations, and governance failures that threaten the company's integrity and future viability. Then, I'll be calling for a vote of no confidence in the current executive leadership. Maurice's face had gone pale. "Odalyn, whatever grievances you think you have, this isn't the appropriate forum. With respect, Dad, this is exactly the appropriate forum." I clicked to the next slide, showing the shareholding breakdown. As of today, I hold 35% of voting shares in this company, inherited through Grandpa's trust, combined with Dr. Martinez, Sarah Chin, and the Phoenix Fund. We represent 52% of all shares. The room went very quiet. Callista found her voice first. This is absurd. You can't just walk in here and what? I asked, turning to face her directly. Tell the truth. I spent the next 20 minutes laying out everything: the fabricated expenses, the buried HR complaints, the systematic theft of credit and ideas. I presented Ellen Morris's documentation, financial records that painted a clear picture of fraud, and testimony from employees who'd been too afraid to speak up until now. These aren't minor oversights, I concluded. They represent a pattern of corruption that has cost this company millions of dollars and immeasurable damage to its reputation. Maurice tried to regain control. Even if some of these allegations are true, and I'm not saying they are, this is a family matter that should be handled privately. This stopped being a family matter when it became fraud. Dr. Martinez interjected. As fiduciaries, we have an obligation to act. Callista finally stood, her composure cracking. This is nothing but jealousy. Odalyn has always resented my success, and now she's trying to destroy everything we've built because she can't accept that she's not leadership material. The words hung in the air like a challenge. I felt the familiar urge to shrink back, to apologize, to make myself smaller. Instead, I walked to the projection screen and clicked to a slide I prepared specifically for this moment. You're right about one thing, Callista. I'm not leadership material. I gestured to the screen, which showed a detailed breakdown of every major project completed in the past 3 years. I'm not leadership material because leaders take credit for their team's work, while I actually do the work. The slide changed, showing side-by-side comparisons of Callista's public presentations and my original project documentation. The plagiarism was impossible to deny. Leaders inspire innovation, while I create the innovations you take credit for. Leaders build sustainable organizations, while I clean up the messes you leave behind. I clicked to the final slide, a simple organization chart showing Crosstech without the current executive team. I'm not leadership material because I believe leadership should be earned through competence, integrity, and results, not inherited through birth order and public relations. The vote was swift and decisive: 52% for removing Maurice as CEO and Callista as COO, 52% for installing an interim leadership structure while we searched for permanent replacements. Callista gathered her things without a word, her face stone cold with fury. Maurice lingered, looking around the room like he was memorizing faces for some future reckoning. You'll regret this, he said quietly as he passed my chair. No, I replied. I regret waiting so long. The news broke within hours. By Tuesday morning, the Denver Business Journal had the story Cross-Tech Shakeup Founding Family Ousted in Shareholder Revolt. The article was surprisingly balanced, focusing on governance issues rather than family drama. But the subtext was clear: the quiet daughter had found her voice, and it was louder than anyone expected. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m. and didn't stop. Reporters, industry analysts, former employees wanting to share their own stories of working under Callista's regime. I declined most interviews, referring questions to our newly hired communications firm. The employee reaction was mixed. About 40% were genuinely excited about the changes, people who'd been frustrated by years of poor decisions and toxic leadership. Another 40% were nervous, uncertain about what new management might mean for their jobs and projects. The remaining 20% were openly hostile, mostly people who'd benefited from the old system of favoritism and politics over performance. 3 department heads submitted their resignations by noon Tuesday. All of them were Callista loyalists who'd been promoted based on their ability to echo her opinions rather than their professional competence. I accepted their resignations immediately and promoted their more qualified subordinates to interim roles. But the real challenge came Wednesday morning, when Callista's lawyers filed an injunction seeking to block the board's actions. They claimed the vote was invalid because of insufficient notice and procedural violations, and they demanded a full investigation into my grandfather's trust structure. The legal filing was accompanied by a carefully orchestrated media campaign. Suddenly, every business blog and tech podcast was discussing the corporate coup at Cross Tech. Callista appeared on Channel 7's morning show, looking appropriately wounded and speaking in measured tones about family betrayal and hostile takeovers. "I've dedicated my career to building this company," she said, her eyes glistening with what might have been tears or camera lights. "To see it torn apart by personal vendettas is heartbreaking." She was good, I had to give her that. She knew exactly how to frame the narrative, the hardworking daughter versus the bitter sister, innovation versus tradition, family values versus cold ambition. The stock price dropped 12% in 2 days. I called an all-hands meeting for Thursday afternoon, the first time I'd addressed the entire company as interim CEO. The main auditorium was packed, people standing along the walls, faces showing everything from curiosity to concern to barely concealed hostility. "I know this week has been difficult," I began, looking out at the sea of faces. "Change is always hard, especially when it comes suddenly, but I want to be clear about why these changes were necessary." I spent 10 minutes outlining the financial irregularities and governance failures, using charts and data rather than emotional appeals. Then I talked about the future investments in R&D that had been delayed, employee programs that had been cut to fund executive expenses, innovations that had been shelved because they didn't generate immediate PR value. This company was built on the principle that good ideas and hard work should be rewarded, I said. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that principle. My goal is to find it again. The questions came fast and pointed. Someone asked about job security. Another person wanted to know if we were planning mass layoffs. A junior developer asked if the new leadership would actually listen to technical feedback or just smile and ignore it like the old regime. I answered as honestly as I could, admitting uncertainty where it existed and making commitments where I felt confident. By the end of the hour, the mood had shifted slightly, still wary, but more hopeful than hostile. That evening, my mother called. She didn't say hello. "You've humiliated this family," she said, her voice tight with rage. "Maurice is talking to lawyers about suing you personally. Callista can't show her face at the country club. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've told the truth," I said quietly. "Your truth," she snapped. "Your version of events. Your bitter, jealous perspective on a sister who's accomplished more in 5 years than you have in your entire career." The accusation stung because part of me had always believed it. Part of me had always wondered if my resentment was just jealousy dressed up as righteousness. "Maybe you're right," I said. "Maybe I am jealous, but jealous of what? The fake achievements, the stolen credit, the systematic abuse of employees who were too afraid to speak up." "You sound just like your grandfather," she said bitterly, "always convinced everyone else was corrupt while he was righteous." Grandpa was right about a lot of things. Your grandfather was a bitter old man who couldn't stand to see anyone else succeed. The conversation ended there. She hung up, and I sat in my apartment, staring at the phone and wondering if I'd just destroyed my family to save a company. I do way. Outside my window, Denver stretched out in all directions, millions of lights representing millions of lives, millions of people trying to do right by their responsibilities and their consciences. I'd chosen the company over the family, competence over loyalty, truth over comfort. Time would tell if it was the right choice. 90 days into my tenure as interim CEO, the real test arrived in the form of our largest client, threatening to terminate their contract. Vitagen Pharmaceuticals represented 30% of our revenue, and their CEO, Richard Thornton, was not pleased with the instability at Crosstech. "I don't do business with companies in chaos," he said during our emergency video call. "The media coverage, the family drama, the leadership turnover, it's exactly the kind of uncertainty my board won't tolerate." I sat in the conference room with our account team, watching $23 million in annual revenue hang in the balance. The old Odalin would have panicked, would have offered concessions and apologies, would have bent over backwards to smooth things over. Instead, I leaned forward and asked, "Richard, what specifically concerns you about our service delivery?" He blinked, apparently expecting defensiveness rather than directness. "Well, the situation with your family. Has our platform performance changed in the past 90 days? No, but have we missed any deadlines or deliverables?" "Not exactly, but the perception. Have any of your employees complained about working with our team?" "Actually," he admitted reluctantly, "they've mentioned improvements in responsiveness and communication." I pulled up a slide showing Vitagen's performance metrics under the old leadership versus the new. Response times were down 30%. Bug resolution was up 40%. Client satisfaction scores had hit an all-time high. "Richard, I understand your concerns about stability, but I'd argue that what we've had for the past 90 days is stability for the first time in years. Stable leadership that prioritizes results over headlines. Stable processes that focus on your needs rather than our internal politics." The call ended with Vitagen agreeing to a 6-month extension while they evaluated our continued performance. It wasn't the long-term commitment I'd wanted, but it was enough time to prove ourselves. That afternoon brought a different kind of challenge. 3 of our senior developers submitted a joint resignation letter, citing uncertainty about technical direction under new management. I called them into my office individually, not to argue or persuade, but to understand. What I learned was sobering. They'd been promised promotions and stock options by Callista, contingent on her return to power. When those promises evaporated, so did their loyalty. "We've got competing offers," Marcus, the lead developer, explained. "TechFlow is offering 20% salary bumps and immediate vesting schedules." TechFlow, one of our biggest competitors, and a company where Callista had been spotted having lunch twice in the past month. "I understand," I said, and I meant it. "You have to do what's best for your careers. But before you go, I'd like you to consider what we're building here." I walked him through our new development roadmap initiatives that had been blocked under the old leadership because they didn't generate immediate revenue: machine learning integration, cloud infrastructure modernization, open source contributions that would enhance our industry reputation. "Under Callista, you were glorified code monkeys," I said bluntly. "You implemented her ideas. Whether they made technical sense or not, I'm offering you the chance to help shape the future of this company." 2 of the 3 agreed to stay. Marcus took the TechFlow offer, but he shook my hand before leaving. "For what it's worth," he said, "this place feels different now, more like a tech company and less like a soap opera." By the end of the quarter, our metrics told the story I'd hoped to write. Revenue was up 8% despite losing the Vitagen uncertainty. Employee satisfaction scores had jumped 23 points. We'd shipped 2 major product updates that had been stuck in bureaucratic limbo for months. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chin called on a Friday afternoon with news that made me laugh out loud. Apple wants to acquire your newest API, she said. They're offering 8 figures for exclusive licensing rights. The API in question was something I'd been developing in my spare time for 3 years, a piece of code that solved a problem the industry had been wrestling with for decades. Under the old regime, it had been dismissed as too theoretical and not commercially viable. How did they even know about it? I asked. I may have mentioned it to some contacts, Sarah said, and I could hear her smiling. Turns out that when you let engineers actually engineer, they create valuable things. The Apple deal would more than offset our Vitagen risks and establish Crosstech as a serious player in next-generation development tools. More importantly, it proved that we were building something sustainable, something based on actual innovation, rather than borrowed credibility. That evening, I sat in my office after everyone else had gone home, looking out at the Denver skyline as the sun set behind the mountains. 6 months ago, I'd been the invisible woman, the useful shadow who made other people look good. Tonight, I was the CEO of a company that was finally living up to its potential. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the Apple announcement. Well played. K. Callista, the first contact we'd had since the boardroom confrontation. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decode the emotion behind it. Respect, resentment, some complicated mixture of both. I typed back, "Thank you." Then I deleted it without sending. Some conversations belong to the past. 1 year later, I stood in the same auditorium where I'd first addressed the company as interim CEO, but everything felt different. The room was fuller. We'd hired 60 new employees in the past 6 months. The faces were more relaxed, more engaged. People actually looked forward to these meetings instead of enduring them. When I stood here a year ago, I began, I made a promise that Crosstech would be a place where good ideas and hard work were rewarded. Today, I want to show you how that promise has translated into results. The slides told a story of transformation. Revenue was up 37%. Employee turnover had dropped to industry-leading levels. We'd launched 4 major products, filed 12 patents, and been recognized as one of Denver's best places to work. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real change was cultural, harder to quantify, but impossible to miss. People spoke up in meetings now. They challenged assumptions, proposed alternatives, took ownership of outcomes. The company felt alive in a way it never had when fear and politics drove decision-making. None of this happened because of me, I continued. It happened because of you. Because when we removed the barriers to excellence, you showed everyone what excellence looks like. The applause was genuine, sustained, the kind that comes from people who are proud of what they've built together. After the meeting, I walked through the office, stopping to chat with teams and individual contributors. The conversations were different now, focused on technical challenges and creative solutions rather than office politics and survival strategies. I paused at a workstation where Jenny Chin, one of our newest hires, was deep in code. She looked up as I approached. "How are you settling in?" I asked. "Better than I expected," she said, smiling. "Everyone keeps asking if I need help or have questions. It's nice. At my last job, you had to fight for information. What made you choose Crosstech?" Honestly, the reputation. People in the industry are talking about this place differently now, like it's somewhere you can actually build things instead of just surviving things. That afternoon, I had lunch with Dr. Martinez at the same restaurant where we'd first plotted our boardroom revolution. She looked exactly the same, but I felt profoundly different, more grounded, more certain of my place in the world. Any regrets? She asked over salad. About the company changes, none. I meant about your family. I considered the question carefully. My parents and I maintained a polite distance, holiday cards and birthday texts, but no real relationship. Callista had moved to San Francisco, where she'd started a consulting firm that specialized in executive communications and brand development. We were strangers now, connected by DNA, but divided by choices. I miss the idea of them, I said finally. I miss having a family that supported each other instead of competed with each other. But I don't miss the reality of what we actually were. Do you think there's any chance of reconciliation? Maybe someday, but it would require them to acknowledge what happened. And I don't think they're capable of that kind of honesty. Dr. Martinez nodded. Some people prefer the comfortable lie to the difficult truth. That evening, I worked late in my office, preparing for a board meeting where we'd discuss international expansion opportunities. The company had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible, but with growth came new challenges, new responsibilities, new decisions that would shape hundreds of people's lives. Around 9 o'clock, I took a break and walked to the window. Downtown Denver sparkled below me, a constellation of ambition and aspiration. Somewhere out there, other quiet daughters were probably sitting in meetings where their ideas were attributed to someone else, writing reports that would be presented by someone else, building things that would be credited to someone else. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to the Women in Tech Denver group, subject mentorship opportunity, finding your voice in technology. Dear colleagues, my name is Odalyn Cross, and I'm the CEO of Cross Tech. I'm writing to offer mentorship opportunities for women who are struggling to get recognition for their contributions in male-dominated or family-dominated organizations. I know what it's like to be the person who does the work while someone else gets the credit. I know what it's like to have good ideas dismissed or stolen. I know what it's like to wonder if you're imagining the inequity or if it's really as bad as it seems. It's really as bad as it seems. But it doesn't have to stay that way. If you're interested in discussing strategies for building your professional credibility, documenting your contributions, and advocating for yourself effectively, please reach out. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is help each other find our voices. Best regards, Odalyn Cross. I sent the email and immediately received an out-of-office reply from one recipient. Thank you for this opportunity. I've been struggling with exactly these issues and would love to connect when I return from vacation. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar San Francisco. Hello. Hi, Odalyn. It's Callista. I set down my pen and leaned back in my chair. This is unexpected. I I wanted to congratulate you on the Apple partnership and the Forbes article about transformational leadership. It's impressive. Thank you. There was a long pause. I also wanted to apologize. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with history and hurt and the possibility of something different. For what specifically, I asked? For taking credit for your work, for not standing up to Dad when he dismissed you, for treating you like you were invisible when you were the most competent person in the room. I was quiet for a moment, processing the admission I'd never expected to hear. Why now? I asked. Because I've been trying to build something of my own, and it's harder than I thought. I finally understand what it means to have an idea and fight for it and risk failure. I never had to do that before. And I realize I never thanked you for all the times you made me look good. I never acknowledged that my success was built on your work. I was so afraid of admitting I wasn't as smart as everyone thought that I let you disappear. The apology was more complete than I dared hope for, and more painful than I'd expected. It opened wounds I thought had healed and validated feelings I'd spent years questioning. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "Is there any chance? Could we try to be sisters again? Not business partners or competitors, just family." I looked out at the city lights, thinking about second chances and the cost of holding grudges and the possibility that people could actually change. "I'd like that," I said. "But it would have to be different this time. Equal, honest." "I understand. And, Odalyn, for what it's worth, I'm proud of you, what you've built, how you've handled everything. I couldn't have done it." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet office for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and growth and the unexpected ways that standing up for yourself could sometimes give other people permission to become better versions of themselves. Outside my window, Denver glittered with infinite possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to lead with integrity, new chances to help other people find their voices and claim their space in the world. I wasn't the quiet daughter anymore. I was the woman who had learned that silence could be strategy, that patience could be power, and that sometimes the best way to change the world was to stop waiting for permission and start building something better. The storm had passed. The rebuilding was just beginning. Epilogue. 3 years later, Crosstech was acquired by Microsoft for $340 million. Odalyn Cross was named to Forbes' 40 Under 40 list and served on the boards of 3 technology companies and 2 nonprofit organizations focused on women's leadership development. Her mentorship program, Finding Your Voice, expanded nationally and helped over 500 women advance in their careers. She never married, but she built a chosen family of colleagues, mentees, and friends who valued her for exactly who she was. She kept her grandfather's letter framed on her office wall, next to a photo of the original Cross Tech team, including herself, visible and valued, and finally taking up the space she'd always deserved. Some storms destroy everything in their path, others clear the air for something better to grow.